At the farmer's market, my neighbor tapped my shoulder and said, "First time I've seen you bring your grandson, what a sweet boy." I stared at her. "I don't have a grandson." She looked past me. "That boy has been following you for 3 stalls now." I turned. A 5-year-old boy with brown hair stood perfectly still watching my face. Before I could speak, he walked straight to me, grabbed my hand and looked up. "Grandpa," he said, "can we go home now? This story won't leave you unchanged. Before we begin, drop a comment for me. Have you ever had to fight for family when others said you shouldn't? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs today." Quick note, some details are fictionalized to highlight the lesson, but the message at its heart is what truly matters. I was 63 years old the morning a stranger told me I had a grandson. Saturday mornings followed the same rhythm they had followed for 40 years. Wake at 6, toast and black coffee. Open the shop at 7, even though no one came in before 9. Close at noon. Walk 3 blocks to North Market Farmers Market. Buy tomatoes, onions, whatever vegetables look fresh. Home by 1. The routine was comfortable, predictable mine. I was selecting tomatoes when it happened, pressing each one gently with my thumb, the way a watchmaker tests a spring firm enough to assess gentle enough not to damage. The June morning smelled like wet pavement and fresh bread from the bakery stall. Saturday crowds hadn't thickened yet. A hand landed on my shoulder. I turned to see Lawrence Greer, a 65-year-old retired postal worker, with a habit of patting people like he was still delivering good news along with the mail. We'd been shopping the same Saturday circuit for a decade, nodding to each other near the produce, occasionally commenting on tomato prices or the weather. "First time I've seen you bring your grandson to the market," Lawrence said, grinning past my shoulder. "He's a handsome little guy." I followed his gaze, expecting to see no one. I expected him to laugh and admit the mistake. "I don't have a grandson," I said. Lawrence's smile faltered. "The boy right behind you. He's been following you for 3 stalls." I turned. The boy was maybe 5 years old, brown hair tucked carefully behind both ears, wearing a faded blue shirt and carrying a stuffed rabbit under one arm. He stood 3 feet behind me, perfectly still, except for his eyes which tracked my face with the focused attention I usually reserve for watch mechanisms. We looked at each other for 3 seconds that felt like 3 minutes. Then he stepped forward, reached up and took my hand. His fingers were small and warm and certain. He didn't ask permission. He took my hand like he'd done it 100 times before, like it belonged to him. "Grandpa," he said, "can we go home now? If you've ever had someone tell you something impossible about your own life, something you should know, but don't you understand the ground shifting under your feet? The market sounds, voices, footsteps. The clink of glass jars faded to static." I stared down at this child who knew me, who called me Grandpa, in a voice that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment. She was late 20s, dark hair pulled back, wearing the slightly frayed professional clothes of someone who worked with children on a government salary. "I'm so sorry," she said, reaching for the boy's other hand. He slipped away at the entrance while I was tying my shoe. The boy didn't let go of me. His grip tightened. I looked past the woman, past the produce stalls, and saw Eleanor. My wife of 40 years stood 3 stalls away, near the flower vendor, completely still. Eleanor, who managed our household finances with the same precision I used for watch repairs. Eleanor, who kept our family calendar, who remembered every birthday and anniversary, who organized our life into neat, predictable squares. She was staring at us. Her face had gone white as bone. She knew. Whatever this was, Eleanor knew. "Atlas," I repeated. The name felt strange in my mouth. The boy looked up at me. "You have the same face as my dad," he said. Not a question, a statement of fact. The tomato I'd been holding fell and rolled across the pavement. I didn't bend to pick it up. I knelt slowly, my knees protesting until I was eye level with this child who claimed to know me. His hand was still in mine. The market noise came back, someone laughing, a vendor calling out prices, the scrape of a cartwheel, but it sounded distant underwater. "What's your name?" I asked, though the woman had already said it. "Atlas," he said. "Atlas Pendleton." Pendleton. My name, my family's name. The name on the shop window, Pendleton Watch Repair, established 1985. "Who's your father?" The words came out rough, like I'd swallowed glass. Atlas tilted his head, studying me with that same intense focus. "My dad's name was Conrad. He said you were very good at fixing broken things." Conrad. 10 weeks ago, Eleanor had told me Conrad died. Pancreatic cancer. Quick and brutal. I'd asked about a funeral. She'd said he'd been cremated already, no service his wishes. I'd asked why he hadn't told me he was sick. She'd said he hadn't wanted to burden anyone. I'd believed her. I looked into the boy's eyes, the same shade of brown. Conrad's had been the same slight downward tilt at the outer corners, the same way of holding my gaze without blinking. I'd seen those eyes once before, 31 years ago, in a delivery room the first time I held my youngest son. The son my wife told me died 10 weeks ago. Except she'd never left a message. I'd asked about it later, confused about why I hadn't gotten word sooner. Eleanor had looked at me strangely and said she'd called the shop, left a voicemail. I'd checked. There was no voicemail. I'd assumed the machine had malfunctioned. Now kneeling on the farmer's market pavement with my dead son's child holding my hand, I understood. There had been no message because Eleanor had never left one. Jennifer guided us to a bench outside the market entrance, her hand on Atlas's shoulder. The boy still held mine. "Your son passed away 10 weeks ago," she said. "Terminal illness. It was very fast at the end. 10 weeks. Conrad had been dead for 10 weeks while I'd fixed watches, eaten breakfast, slept beside a woman who knew and said nothing. He's been in emergency foster care since." Carmela continued, her voice careful and steady. "The mother died before that. I don't have those details yet. Atlas has been with the state the whole time. I'm his third temporary placement in 2 months. Third placement in 2 months. This child had lost both parents and been moved between strangers' homes while my wife asked about my day. Atlas sat between us, small legs dangling. He pulled a stuffed animal from under his arm, gray fabric, floppy ears, one eye loose. I took the rabbit carefully. The fabric was worn thin in places. Someone had restitched one ear with thread that didn't quite match. I turned it over the watchmaker's instinct to examine, to understand. That's when I felt it, something hard sewn into the belly. "Hey, may I asked Atlas. He nodded. I found the seam along the back, worked it open with my thumbnail. Inside the stuffing, wrapped in plastic, was a fabric badge, the kind watch repair shops gave out in the 70s before everything became digital. I pulled it free. Pendleton Watch Repair, 412 Franklin Street, Columbus, Ohio. My shop, my address. On the back, in handwriting that made my throat close, were instructions: "Find the man with eyes like your father's. Show him this. He will help you." Conrad's handwriting, shakier than I remembered, but unmistakable. My son had been dying alone in a town 40 minutes north, and he'd spent his final days sewing my address into his child's stuffed animal because he believed, despite everything, despite 22 years of silence, that I would do the right thing. "Your son planned this," Carmela said quietly. "He made sure Atlas could find you." I couldn't speak. The market noise sounded distant and wrong. People were buying vegetables, planning meals, living ordinary lives. Mine had just split in half, before I knew and after. I bought Atlas milk from a nearby vendor. Watched him drink in careful sips while Jennifer explained procedures. DNA test, home study, background checks, emergency placement protocols. I heard maybe half of it. When Jennifer's phone rang, I told her I would be in touch. I gave her my shop number and promised to come to the county office Monday morning. Then I drove to my shop instead of going home. The watch repair sat on Franklin Street between a shuttered insurance office and a tax service that only opened January through April. 90 years old, brick-worn, smooth my name in gold letters on the window. Inside smelled like machine oil and metal. 20 wall clocks ticked in different rhythms. I sat at my workbench surrounded by tools in perfect rows and picked up the phone. Franklin County Child Services answered on the third ring. "This is Arthur Pendleton," I said. "I need to speak to someone about my grandson Atlas Pendleton." They transferred me twice before I reached Rachel Hoffman, the intake coordinator. She spoke with the same careful neutrality as Carmela, trained to navigate grief and bureaucracy in equal measure. "Yes, Mr. Pendleton," she said. "We have your file here. I'm glad you called. When were you planning to contact me?" I kept my voice level. Watchmakers learn patience. We work with tiny springs that break if you rush, if you force, if you let anger shake your hands. "We notified your wife, Eleanor Pendleton, 7 weeks ago," Rachel said. "She's listed as next of kin on the father's emergency contacts. She signed receipt of notification and stated she would coordinate with other family members internally." 7 weeks. 7 weeks is 49 days, 336 meals, 1,000 small conversations about weather and bills and whose turn it was to take out the trash. 7 Sunday mornings doing the crossword puzzle side by side. 7 Friday nights watching the news while she folded laundry and I read the paper. Why wasn't I contacted directly? I asked. Rachel's pause was careful. You weren't listed on Conrad Pendleton's emergency contact form. Your wife was the primary family contact. We followed protocol. Of course Eleanor was primary, because Conrad and I hadn't spoken in 22 years, because whatever had driven him away had been enough to leave me off the paperwork entirely, but not enough to stop him from sewing my address into his son's only comfort object. Not enough to keep him from trusting me in the end with the most important thing he'd ever done. Mr. Pendleton, Rachel's voice pulled me back. We'll need you to come in Monday morning. There's paperwork to start the kinship placement process. I confirmed the time, thanked her, hung up. Evening light slanted through the shop window, turning the dust gold. The clocks ticked their steady rhythm, 17 different mechanisms, all keeping the same time in slightly different ways. Eleanor had known for 7 weeks, signed papers, made promises to the county, then came home and asked me about my day. Every dinner, every morning, coffee every Sunday, crossword while my 5-year-old grandson slept in a stranger's house 3 miles away. I sat at my workbench as the light faded and understood that 40 years of marriage could be as carefully constructed as any watch mechanism, and just as easy to break once you knew where to apply the right pressure. 4 days later, the DNA results would arrive, and I would cry for the first time in a decade. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, wedged into my shop's mail slot at 6:47. I know because I'd been sitting inside in the dark waiting for it since 5:30. 4 days since the farmer's market. 4 days of going through the motions, opening the shop, repairing watches, closing at noon, going home to a wife who set the table and asked about my day as if the world hadn't split open. I broke the seal at my workbench. Morning coffee sat untouched beside me, going cold. The report was 2 pages, clean clinical language, charts and numbers that reduced blood and bone and the shape of a child's eyes to percentages and probabilities. Combined paternity index, 99.9%. Probability of relationship, grandfather and grandson. I read it 3 times, then set it down, aligning the edges perfectly with the corner of my workbench. The watchmaker's habit precision, even when your hands want to shake, even when the paper you're holding is confirming that your world has fundamentally altered. 99.9%, I said aloud to the empty shop. Probability of relationship, grandfather and grandson. The wall clocks ticked their steady rhythm. 17 different mechanisms, 17 different makers, all agreeing on the truth. I already knew, but knowing and having it written on paper by a laboratory are 2 different kinds of truth. One you can doubt, one you can't. Atlas was my grandson, had been my grandson for 5 years, while I fixed watches 3 miles away and ate dinner with a woman who knew and never said a word. The paper just made it so Eleanor couldn't pretend otherwise. I sat motionless at my workbench. The wall clock with the brass face and Roman numerals, the one I'd inherited from my father, marked 7 minutes passing. 7 minutes of perfect stillness while the world continued ticking around me. Then I cried, quietly seated with my hands flat on the workbench beside the DNA report. It was the first time I had cried since my own father's funeral, 11 years ago. All while he had lived 40 minutes away, repairing strangers' watches completely unaware. I would have come, I whispered to the empty shop. If you had called, I would have come. But someone made sure Conrad never did. There are different kinds of crying. There's the crying you do when something ends suddenly, when the loss is sharp and immediate. And there's the crying you do when you realize something ended 5 years ago, and nobody told you until the funeral was long over. When you understand that while you were living your ordinary life, your youngest son was dying in a town 40 minutes north, preparing his child to find you, because he still believed, despite everything, that you were worth finding. I don't know how long I sat there. The brass clock said 23 minutes, but time does strange things when you're mourning someone who's been dead for 10 weeks, while you thought you were mourning him for only 4 days. Eventually, I wiped my face, made fresh coffee, left a voicemail on Eleanor's cell phone. DNA results came. We need to talk. Then I opened the shop, repaired Mrs. Henderson's anniversary watch, adjusted the band on Mr. Cole's Timex, and went through the careful motions of a normal Thursday. Eleanor called back at 7:15 that evening. I was still at the shop doing paperwork I didn't need to do, avoiding going home to a house that felt like it belonged to a stranger. Arthur. No greeting. Why are you digging this up? Digging this up. Like Atlas was archaeology, like a 5-year-old child was something buried that should have stayed underground. Digging what up? I kept my voice level. A child exists. That's not archaeology, Eleanor. Brent and Victoria have a stable home, she said. Not an answer, a deflection. 2 parents a yard, good schools in their district. The boy will be better off with them. The boy, not Atlas, not your grandson. The boy. Do you know the difference between silence and a lie? Silence is when you don't speak. A lie is when you sit across the breakfast table for 7 weeks and ask about the weather. His name is Atlas, I said. And 7 weeks ago, you could have told me he existed. A pause, long enough that I heard her breathing change. I was handling it quietly, she said finally. There are reasons I didn't tell you. Reasons older than you think. Reasons older than I think. That phrase landed like a gear clicking into place. Not reasons. Not my reasons. Reasons older than you think. What reasons, I asked. But the line was already dead. She'd hung up mid-conversation the way you hang up when you've said more than you meant to say. I set down the phone and sat in the shop's silence for a full minute. The clocks ticked. Outside a car passed. Someone laughed on the sidewalk. Then I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. New, unused, the kind I used for complicated repair jobs that needed documentation. I wrote the truth on the tab in the block capitals. Inside, I began documenting, a skill from 40 years of watch repair consultations, writing down exactly what the customer said, word for word, because details matter and memory lies, but written records don't. Eleanor called 7:15 p.m., did not ask about DNA results. First words, "Why are you digging this up?" I wrote down the entire conversation, every word I could remember, every pause, every deflection. When I finished, I underlined 2 phrases. Why are you digging this up? Reasons older than you think. The watchmaker in me recognized those phrases for what they were, not slips of the tongue, not careless words. Evidence. Eleanor wasn't hiding one secret about 7 weeks of silence. She was protecting something much older, something that had been ticking away in the background of our marriage like a watch mechanism I'd never bothered to open and examine. 40 years of marriage, and I was just now realizing I'd never looked inside. I closed the folder, filed it in my desk drawer, locked it. 2 days later, my eldest son and his wife would arrive at my door uninvited, carrying a color-coded binder and too many questions about Conrad's house in Marion. But that night, I sat alone in my shop and understood that I wasn't just fighting for Atlas. I was fighting to find out what my wife had been hiding for longer than my grandson had been alive. 2 days after the DNA confirmation, my eldest son and his wife arrived at my door on Saturday evening at 7:30, carrying a 3-ring binder with color-coded tabs and the kind of smiles people rehearse before asking for money. Brent Pendleton, my 35-year-old eldest son, stood on my porch beside his wife, wearing the expression of a man who'd rather be anywhere else but had stopped arguing about it years ago. Victoria Pendleton, 32, and married to Brent for 6 years, carried the binder the way a salesperson carries a pitch deck with practiced confidence and 2 bright eyes. They didn't knock. Brent used his old key, the one from when he'd lived here 20 years ago, the one I'd never asked him to return because I'd never imagined needing to. His name is Atlas, I said, and you could have called first. This won't take long. She was already moving toward the living room, Brent following silently behind her like a shadow. She sat on the sofa, spread the binder on the coffee table, opened to a title page in professional font Atlas's transition plan. Transition, not introduction, not meeting. Transition as if the destination was already decided and we were just negotiating the timeline. I stayed standing. Victoria flipped to the first tabbed section. Yellow tab labeled Schools. We're zoned for Riverside Elementary, she said. Rated 8 out of 10 on the state assessment. Strong reading program, full-day kindergarten. Atlas would start in the fall semester. She flipped another tab. Blue. Healthcare. Here's a list of pediatricians within our insurance network, all accepting new patients. Dr. Morrison comes highly recommended, and we've confirmed Atlas can be added to our family plan within 30 days of placement. Another tab. Green. Activities. Youth soccer, swimming lessons, library story hour, all within 3 miles of our house. We've mapped the routes. She had maps, printed maps with highlighted routes and drive times calculated to the minute. If you've ever watched someone give a presentation, they've practiced in a mirror, you know what I mean. The pauses are too perfect, the smile too steady, the voice too smooth to be thinking out loud. This wasn't Victoria talking to her father-in-law. This was Victoria delivering a pitch she'd rehearsed until every inflection landed exactly where she wanted it. Brent sat beside her on the sofa. hands folded in his lap, eyes on the carpet. He hadn't said a word since entering, hadn't looked at me once. "You haven't said a word yet," I said to him. He glanced up briefly, then back to the carpet. "Victoria's better at explaining things." Victoria turned another tab. Pink, living space. "The guest room is already cleared," she said. "We've ordered a bed dresser bookshelf, everything a 5-year-old needs. The furniture arrives Tuesday." She slid a photo across the table. Their guest room empty now, with painter's tape marking where furniture would go. Another photo, a catalog page with a race car bed price tag visible in the corner. Another, a wooden bookshelf assembly, required still in the box. They'd bought furniture before talking to me, before meeting Atlas, before anyone had made any decisions about anything. They'd gone to a store and purchased a child's bedroom set. "As this is very thorough," I said. Victoria smiled. Not warmth, satisfaction. The smile of someone who knows they've done the work, assembled the evidence, built the case. "We want what's best for Atlas," she said. "Brent and I have been discussing this since Eleanor told us about the situation. We're in the best position to provide stability. 2 parents established home financial security. Eleanor told us. Not Eleanor informed us. Told us like it was a directive, not information." Victoria reached the final tab. Purple. Conclusion. "And of course," she said, voice still smooth and practiced, "there's the property in Marion. Conrad's house will need proper management, someone to coordinate the estate handle." She stopped mid-sentence. I watched her register what she'd just said, watched her mental gears catch and skip like a watch mechanism with a bent tooth. "What I mean is," she continued, pivoting hard, "Atlas's long-term stability requires thoughtful planning. A child who's lost both parents needs consistency, structure, emotional support." "You mentioned the house before you said his name," I said quietly. "Before you mentioned what he needs emotionally." Silence. A watchmaker learns to read mechanisms by watching which gear moves first. People are the same. What they mention at first tells you what's really driving the machine. Victoria had come into my home with a binder full of school ratings and furniture catalogs and carefully highlighted maps. But when she'd reached her conclusion, when the practice script had relaxed for just one moment, she'd mentioned Conrad's property first, the house, the estate, the management and coordination. Only then had she caught herself and pivoted to the grieving 5-year-old boy. "I think you two should go home now," I said, standing. "I'll think about what you've said." "We just want what's best for," Victoria started. I said, "I'll think about it." Brent stood, immediately relief visible in his shoulders. He'd been waiting for permission to leave since the moment they had arrived. Victoria gathered her binder slowly, each movement precise and controlled. At the door, she turned back. "Arthur, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly," I said. "Good night, Victoria." I closed the door before she could respond. I documented every tab in the binder, every piece of evidence they had presented, every word of Victoria's practice pitch. And I underlined one observation twice. Victoria mentioned Conrad's Marion property and estate management before she mentioned Atlas's emotional needs. Not by accident, by priority. People don't get the order wrong by accident. Not when they've practiced their presentation in a mirror. Not when they've color-coded their tabs and printed maps with drive times calculated to the minute. They'd come to my home with a binder full of school ratings and furniture catalogs. But what they really wanted was sitting 40 minutes north in Marion, a paid-off house worth $220,000, and a 5-year-old boy who came with $1,600 a month in survivor benefits until he turned 18. I closed the folder, sat at my desk in the quiet house. That same night, I would open the family financial books Eleanor had managed for 30 years and discover the first number that didn't reconcile. After Victoria and Brent left the Saturday night, I went to the shelf above the television and retrieved the family financial books. Eleanor's domain for 30 years, organized by year, accessible to anyone who bothered to look, which I never had until now. I spread them across my watch shop workbench an hour later, under the bright magnifying lamp I used for repair work. Read them the way I read clock mechanisms, slowly line by line, checking each entry for gears that don't mesh naturally. Eleanor's handwriting filled 30 years of household accounts, blue ink, careful and controlled, mortgage payments, utility bills, grocery receipts, everything documented with the precision of someone who believed that if the numbers balanced, the life balanced too. Except Eleanor hadn't just recorded our household accounts. Checking account at the same bank we'd used for 40 years. 2 recent deposits highlighted in Eleanor's blue ink with small check marks beside them. $1,600, May 5th. $1,600, June 5th. $3,200 total. I pulled out the truth folder, cross-referenced the dates. Eleanor had signed the welfare acknowledgement form on May 2nd, promising to coordinate with family, promising to handle Atlas's placement internally. 3 days later, $1,600 appeared in Victoria's account. Reading financial books is like reading clock mechanisms. Every number is a gear, and when one gear spins the wrong direction, you feel it in the whole machine before you see it on the page. The welfare form said Eleanor was contacted as next of kin. The form said she acknowledged responsibility for family coordination. The form said she understood the child's needs came first. Then 3 days later, she'd coordinated all right. Coordinated with Victoria to redirect Atlas's survivor benefits $1,600 a month, meant for a 5-year-old boy sleeping in a stranger's house, into an account I'd never known existed. 2 deposits, 2 months, exactly the timeline since Conrad's death 10 weeks ago. Eleanor had signed promising to coordinate with family, then coordinated with Victoria to take my grandson's money before telling me he existed. I wrote it in the truth folder. Date May 2nd, Eleanor signs welfare acknowledgement. Date May 5th, first deposit to Victoria's account. Timeline 3 days. Amount $1,600 monthly Atlas's survivor benefits. Total stolen $3,200 while child remains in emergency foster care. I closed the financial books, filed them back on the shelf, went home to a house that felt like it belonged to strangers. The following Thursday, I entered the supervised visitation room at Franklin County Child Services for the first time. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, institutional beige walls that had seen thousands of fractured families try to piece themselves back together under legal supervision. Jennifer brought Atlas and the boy, holding Clarence the stuffed rabbit. The boy wore the same faded blue shirt from the farmer's market hair tucked behind his ears. He walked directly to the chair beside mine and sat down without hesitation, as if he'd been holding that seat in his mind since our first meeting. "Hi, Grandpa," he said. "I brought Clarence." "I remember," I said. "Your dad gave him to you." Atlas brightened. "You remember?" How could I forget the stuffed animal had brought him to me? The badge sewn inside had carried my address across 40 minutes and 22 years of silence. Jennifer sat in the corner with a clipboard present, but trying to be invisible, giving us space within the structure of state supervision. Atlas reached into the small opening along Clarence's back seam, the one I'd noticed at the market, and extracted the watch badge. He held it out to me with both small hands, solemn and careful. "My dad said to give you this when I found you," he said. "He said you'd know what it means." I took the badge. Brass tarnish now stamped with letters I'd had made 40 years ago, when the shop was new, and my sons were young, and the future felt like something I could build with patient hands. Pendleton Watch Repair, 412 Franklin Street. I'd given this to Conrad when he was 10 years old. The day I'd taught him to repair his first pocket watch, a simple mechanism with only 8 moving parts perfect for small fingers learning patience. Conrad had worn it on every shirt for years, pinned it to his jacket when he went to college. I'd assumed he'd thrown it away when he left at 31, when whatever had driven us apart had seemed too large to cross. But he hadn't thrown it away. He'd carried it for 22 years, then sewn it into his son's only comfort object, with instructions to find the man with eyes like his father's. "I gave this to your father when he was 10 years old," I said, my voice rough. "The day I taught him to repair his first watch." Atlas nodded seriously. "Dad said you have a shop on Franklin Street and you can fix anything, even things that seem too broken." The room went quiet except for the fluorescent lights humming overhead and Jennifer's pen scratching notes on her clipboard. "Your dad said that?" I asked. Atlas nodded again. "All the time. He said Grandpa Arthur can fix anything if you give him enough time and the right tools. There are things a father gives his son that never really leave a brass badge, a name on a shop window, a belief that broken things can be fixed if you're patient enough with the small parts." Conrad had carried those things through 22 years of silence, through terminal illness and single fatherhood and the final weeks of his life, when he'd sewn this badge into gray fabric with shaking hands. He'd died believing I'd rejected him. Eleanor had made sure of that, with 22 years of lies and interference. But he'd planned this moment anyway. My son had trusted me even when he thought I didn't trust him back. I held the badge Conrad carried for 3 decades before passing it to his son with instructions to find me. The brass was warm from Atlas's small hands worn smooth at the edges from years in Conrad's pocket. Conrad had been building a bridge back to me for 5 years, one careful stitch at a time. And I'd be damned if I'd let Eleanor and Victoria burn it down for $1,600 a month and a house in Marion. I carried 40 years of my wife's lies, up 4 flights of stairs in a manila folder on a Monday morning in early July, and the attorney understood the mechanism in 30 seconds of looking at my diagram. 3 weeks had passed since the farmer's market. 3 weeks of supervised visits with Atlas of documenting every conversation, of building the case piece by methodical piece, the way I'd built watch mechanisms for 4 decades. The decision to hire a lawyer had been easy. Finding one who'd understand that evidence was better than emotion, that took longer. Cedric Harrington, a 50-year-old family law attorney with 15 years specializing in guardianship cases, looked at my gear diagram for 30 seconds before setting down his pen and giving me his complete attention. "Mr. Pendleton," he said, "I understand you're seeking guardianship of your grandson. Tell me about the situation." I declined the offered coffee, spread the truth folder across his desk. Instead, 50 pages of documentation, organized with watchmaker precision, financial ledgers, DNA results, welfare acknowledgement forms, bank statements, dates and signatures and numbers that told the story better than I could. "I didn't know I had a grandson until 3 weeks ago," I said. "My wife knew for 7 weeks before that and said nothing." Cedric reached for his notepad. "Start from the beginning. I'll need dates, names, documentation." I unfolded the hand-drawn diagram I'd created in my shop 2 nights prior, a visual flowchart showing every piece of evidence connected like a clock mechanism. "Each number is a gear," I said, pointing to the chart. "When one spins wrong, you trace it backward to find which one was installed incorrectly." The DNA confirmation sat at the center. Lines connected it to the farmer's market encounter, to Conrad's death certificate, to Atlas's foster placement. Eleanor's welfare signature connected to her 7-week silence. Victoria's bank deposits connected to the redirected benefits. Every fact linked to every other fact in a web of documented deception. Cedric studied the diagram in silence. 30 seconds, a full minute. Then he looked up, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't expected: respect. "This is..." He paused, choosing words carefully. "I've practiced family law for 15 years. I've never seen a case presented this way. Most people walk into a lawyer's office with emotion and memories. I walked in with dates, bank statements, and a diagram showing exactly how 40 years of marriage had spent the last 7 weeks lying to my face. DNA here proves relationship at 99.9%, I said, pointing to the center gear. These bank deposits prove fraud survivor benefits meant for Atlas redirected to my daughter-in-law's account while he slept in foster care. This signature proves Eleanor knew and concealed deliberately." Cedric made notes, asked questions. I answered with dates and documentation. No speculation, just facts I could prove with paper trails and time stamps. He typed into his computer while I explained about Conrad's watch badge, about the stuffed rabbit about Atlas calling me grandpa at the farmer's market, like he'd been holding that word in his mouth for weeks, waiting for the right person to say it to. Then Cedric's expression shifted. He stopped typing mid-sentence, leaned closer to the screen, clicked through documents with increasing focus. "Arthur," he said, and the shift from Mr. Pendleton to my first name told me something had changed. "There's something you need to see." He turned the monitor toward me. "Guardianship petition. Case number 2021-GC-4721. Petitioners Brent Pendleton and Victoria Pendleton. Minor child Atlas Pendleton, age 5. Filing date June 25th, 2021. 6 days ago. They'd filed 6 days ago. Cedric scrolled down to the signature section. There, in the same careful handwriting I'd seen on 40 years of birthday cards and grocery lists, was Eleanor Pendleton's signature. "Notarized consent of grandmother," the header read. "Your wife signed consent for your son and daughter-in-law's petition," Cedric said quietly. "She's actively supporting them as guardians instead of you. You know that feeling when you realize you've been in a race for 3 weeks, but everyone else got a 2-month head start and nobody mentioned the race had begun. That's what Eleanor's signature at the bottom of that petition felt like." I sat motionless. The office wall clock ticked 11 seconds while I absorbed what the screen showed me. Eleanor hadn't just hidden Atlas. She'd coordinated with Brent and Victoria, filed legal paperwork, signed official documents supporting their guardianship claim, built a legal wall to keep my grandson away from me, while I'd been trying to figure out why she'd concealed him in the first place. She didn't just hide him, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too quiet, too controlled. She's actively working to keep him from me. Cedric nodded. We'll need to file a competing petition. I can have it ready by end of week. File it today. He paused. Today is aggressive. We should review strategy, gather additional... I've been 7 weeks behind since this started, I said. Eleanor knew in early May. She coordinated with Brent and Victoria while I didn't even know Atlas existed. They filed 6 days ago while I was still trying to understand why my wife would conceal a 5-year-old child. I stood, placed both hands flat on Cedric's desk, the way I'd place my hands on my workbench when beginning a complicated repair. I won't be behind another day, I said. File the counterpetition today. I'll sign whatever needs signing. I'll pay whatever needs paying. But I will not spend one more day starting this race after everyone else has already been running. Cedric looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll have it filed by 5 p.m., he said. Eleanor's signature sat at the bottom of that court document in her careful handwriting, notarized official, legally binding consent for our eldest son to take custody of the grandson she'd hidden from me. She hadn't just concealed Atlas. She'd built a legal wall to keep him concealed permanently. And I'd walked into this office thinking I was starting a case when, really, I was joining one already in progress. 3 days later, I would find the private investigator's invoice in Eleanor's financial records and understand the lies went deeper than 7 weeks. I went back to the numbers 3 evenings later, because lawyers deal in arguments, but watchmakers deal in evidence, and I needed to know if Eleanor's betrayal had a timeline I could measure. 3 days since filing the counterpetition. 3 days of waiting for the court to schedule a hearing, while Cedric gathered evidence and I gathered the kind of documentation that turned suspicion into proof. Thursday evening, I spread the financial ledgers across my workbench again, reviewed them month by month, looking for patterns I'd missed before. Eleanor's careful handwriting filled 40 years of entries, mortgage payments, utility bills, grocery receipts, all documented with the precision of someone who believed accounting equaled honesty. I found it in the January 2021 ledger. January 15, 2021, consulting services, $800, Payee Meridian Investigations, LLC. The entry was sandwiched between the gas bill and a payment to the dentist. Barely noticeable except for one thing I'd never heard Eleanor mention Meridian Investigations. Never seen invoices, never saw correspondence. Never knew we'd paid anyone for consulting services of any kind. Consulting services, I said aloud to the empty shop. That's what you call it when you don't want to write what it really is. I opened my laptop, the one I used for business invoices and parts orders, and searched Meridian Investigations, LLC. Their website loaded in 3 seconds. Professional design, discrete logo, services listed in neat columns, surveillance operations, background verification, asset location, family investigations. Not management consulting, not financial services. Private investigators who follow people and document their lives. I cross-referenced the date, January 15, 2021. Conrad died March 20th. Conrad was already dying when Eleanor paid them $800. There's a difference between hiding something when you find out about it and hiring someone to investigate it 3 months early so you can plan exactly how to hide it. One is concealment, the other is conspiracy. She hired someone to watch my son die, I said to the empty shop. The clocks ticked their agreement. To confirm he had a child, to verify the address in Marion, to document the situation so she'd be ready when the time came. I pulled out a notepad and mapped the sequence. January 15, 2021. Eleanor pays $800 to private investigator. March 20th, 2021, Conrad dies. May 2nd, 2021, Eleanor signs welfare acknowledgement form. June 14th, 2021, I meet Atlas at the farmer's market. The welfare worker who'd called in May thought they were informing Eleanor about a tragic situation. But Eleanor wasn't being informed. She was creating a documented start date for her lies. Official notification that she could point to later and say, "That's when I found out," while an $800 invoice from 3 months earlier sat hidden in the household ledger, proving she'd known all along. My son was dying 40 minutes north in Marion, and my wife was paying strangers in Columbus to watch him die while documenting the grandson I didn't know existed, so she could be ready with the right lies when the time came. I sat at my workbench and tried to imagine it. Eleanor receiving a phone call or email from Meridian Investigations in late January or early February, opening a report that said, "Subject Conrad Pendleton confirmed residing at Marion address. Terminal illness confirmed. Minor child confirmed in residence age approximately 5 years. Name Atlas Pendleton. Mother deceased. Subject appears to be primary caregiver during terminal stage." Eleanor reading that report, filing it away, making decisions, not calling me, not telling me my youngest son was dying, not suggesting we drive to Marion, knock on the door, attempt reconciliation before it was too late. Just documenting, planning, waiting. For 2 months she knew Conrad was dying. 2 months when I could have driven 40 minutes north, could have sat beside his hospital bed, could have met my grandson while his father was still alive to make the introduction. She chose not to tell me. Chose to let Conrad die, believing the lie she'd apparently told him about me, whatever lie had kept us apart for 22 years, whatever lie had made him leave me off his emergency contact form while still sewing my shop address into his son's stuffed animal. I opened the truth folder, created a new entry on a fresh page. January 15th, 2021. Eleanor pays $800 to Meridian Investigations, LLC for private investigation services. Date is exactly 2 months before Conrad's death on March 20th, 2021. Proof Eleanor knew about terminal illness and Atlas's existence months in advance of welfare notification. I labeled the tab, Proof of Foreknowledge 5 months. Beneath that I wrote, this wasn't concealment after the fact. This was conspiracy before the death. Eleanor didn't react to Conrad dying by hiding Atlas. She prepared for Conrad dying by planning the concealment months in advance. My hand was steady writing it, the watchmaker's precision even when documenting the systematic destruction of my family. I wrote one more line. For 2 months Eleanor knew my son was dying, could have called me, could have let us reconcile, could have let me meet my grandson while Conrad was alive. Chose not to. Let Conrad die, believing I had rejected him. The $800 invoice wasn't evidence of concealment. It was evidence of calculation. Eleanor hadn't hidden Atlas out of panic or grief or confusion after Conrad's death. She'd planned it, hired professionals, gathered intelligence, made strategic decisions about what to reveal and when to reveal it all, while my son spent his final weeks in a hospice bed 40 minutes away, believing his father didn't want him. I closed the folder, filed it in my desk drawer with the rest of the evidence. Outside, the evening darkened. The shop clocks ticked toward 9 p.m. Somewhere 3 miles away, Atlas was probably asleep in Jennifer's foster home, holding Clarence the stuffed rabbit, unaware that his grandfather was building a legal case 1 invoice at a time. The next morning, I would walk into my own kitchen and put that invoice on the table in front of Eleanor, and for the first time in 40 years, I would demand the truth. I placed the private investigator's invoice on our kitchen table, Saturday morning, between the coffee pot and the sugar bowl, and Eleanor looked at it for 37 seconds, before turning back to the counter without saying a word. 7:30 a.m. The same Saturday morning routine we'd followed for 40 years. Eleanor at the counter making coffee, me at the table with the newspaper, the small domestic rituals of long marriage that feel like comfort until the morning they feel like performance. I didn't unfold the newspaper. I set down the photocopied invoice instead. Eleanor glanced at it. I watched her posture shift shoulders, tightening spine, straightening the physical recognition that happens before conscious thought. She knew what it was immediately, but she continued pouring coffee with deliberate slowness, her back to me. The wall clock ticked, 37 seconds. I counted. Then she finally turned, holding the coffee pot, and looked at me instead of the document. "We need to talk about this," I said. "I'm making coffee," she replied. Another silence, another 10 seconds on the clock. "Meridian Investigations," I said. "January 2021, $800. Eleanor set down the coffee pot carefully, precisely, the way she did everything with control, with intention, with the belief that if you maintained proper form, the content would take care of itself. "Why are you digging this up, Arthur?" She used the same phrase from the phone call 2 weeks ago, the same intonation. "What's the point?" "Digging this up. Like an $800 payment to spy on our dying son was something buried that should have stayed underground. Digging what up, I kept my voice level. You paid someone to watch our son while he was dying. You're oversimplifying a very complicated situation. Eleanor picked up her coffee cup, set it down again without drinking. Her hands were steady, but her jaw was tight, 40 years of practiced composure under stress. And then unsimplify it, I said. Explain to me why you hired a private investigator in January when Conrad still had 2 months to live. I did what I had to do to protect this family. The words came out rehearsed like she'd been preparing this defense since the moment I'd found the invoice. Our family. Our family. Not the family, not this family. Our family. Possessive, exclusive, defined by Eleanor's careful boundaries about who counted and who didn't. Atlas is family, I said. He's Conrad's son. He's my grandson. He is our family. Eleanor's face tightened. You don't understand what was at stake. Then explain it. I leaned forward. Make me understand how watching Conrad die alone protected anything. Make me understand how letting a 5-year-old sleep in foster care for 7 weeks protected our family. You can live with someone for 40 years and believe you know them. Wake up beside them 14,000 mornings. Share coffee and crossword puzzles and the comfortable silence of long marriage, and then one morning discover you've been living with a stranger who made different moral calculations than you ever imagined. Eleanor looked at me for a long moment. I watched her search for words start to speak twice, stop both times. Finally, I can't explain this to you when you're being unreasonable. Unreasonable. Asking why your wife hired someone to document your grandson's existence while keeping it secret for 5 months was unreasonable. I'm not being unreasonable, I said. I'm asking about an $800 charge to spy on our dying son. That seems like a reasonable question. You're making this about the money. I'm making this about the timeline. I tapped the invoice. January 15th. Conrad didn't die until March 20th. You had 2 months, Eleanor. 2 months when you knew he was dying and knew he had a child. 2 months when we could have driven to Marion, could have reconciled, could have let him know we cared. There are reasons I can't. She stopped, started again. The situation was more complicated than you. Stop telling me it's complicated, I said. Explain it. Use actual words and explain why you chose to let our son die believing we'd rejected him. The kitchen went silent, except for the refrigerator humming and the wall clock ticking and the sound of Eleanor's breathing getting slightly faster. Then she picked up her purse from the counter. Where are you going? I asked. I can't have this conversation when you're being like this. She moved toward the kitchen door. Being like what? Asking questions? You're not trying to understand. You're trying to prosecute. Eleanor's hand was on the doorknob. There are things about this situation that are older than you realize. Things that go back further than you think. Then tell me, I said. Help me understand. But she was already opening the door. Eleanor. The door closed, not slammed. Eleanor didn't slam doors. She closed them with controlled firmness, the way she did everything precisely deliberately maintaining form, even in retreat. I sat alone at the kitchen table, with the photocopied invoice, Eleanor's coffee cup, still sitting on the counter half full and steaming, and 40 years of marriage feeling suddenly hollow and strange. The coffee cup Eleanor left on the table was still half full and still warm when I picked it up to carry to the sink, and that small domestic gesture, cleaning up after my wife of 40 years, felt like tending to the belongings of someone who'd already moved out. I washed the cup, dried it, put it back in the cabinet. Then I sat at the kitchen table in the empty house and tried to reconcile 2 versions of the same woman, the one I'd lived with for 4 decades, and the one who'd hired strangers to document our grandson's existence while letting our son die believing his father had abandoned him. Eleanor had walked out rather than answer why. In 40 years of marriage, we'd had arguments that ended with apologies, and arguments that ended with silence, but this was the first argument that ended with me, sitting alone in my own kitchen, feeling like I was trespassing in a stranger's house. 4 days since the kitchen confrontation. 4 days of Eleanor sleeping in the guest room, and me sleeping alone in a bed I'd shared with her for 40 years, the silence between us growing thicker and more permanent. I was repairing a pocket watch at my workbench when my phone rang, Cedric's name on the screen. Arthur, he said, and I heard controlled excitement in his voice. I found something. UPS secure mailbox in Marion. Conrad rented it 5 years ago. I set down my tools carefully. 5 years, when Atlas was born. Renewed annually. Cedric continued. Last renewal dated 3 weeks before he died. I went this morning with the DNA results and power of attorney. There's a will inside Arthur, a complete notarized guardianship designation. The watch I'd been repairing ticked steadily on the workbench. The wall clocks continued their rhythms, but something fundamental had shifted. Conrad had planned this, not in panic as he was dying. 5 years ago when Atlas was born, he'd rented a secure mailbox and put legal documents inside, then renewed it year after year. Then 3 weeks before dying, knowing he was dying, he'd paid for another year, just in case it took me longer to find. I drove to Cedric's office, parked on High Street, climbed the 4 flights of stairs I'd climbed 3 weeks ago when this was just a guardianship case, and I hadn't yet understood the depth of Eleanor's planning or Conrad's preparation. Cedric had the documents spread across his desk, clean white pages, professional formatting, the kind of legal work that costs money and requires witnesses, and cannot be dismissed as a dying man's confused last wish. Complete notarized will, Cedric said, gesturing to the papers. Dated 2 months before Conrad's death. Professionally executed with witness signatures. He turned the first page toward me. I, Conrad Pendleton, being of sound mind and body, hereby designate my father, Arthur Pendleton, as sole legal guardian of my minor son, Atlas Pendleton, age 5 years. Sole guardian, not Eleanor, not Brent, not Victoria, not the county. Me. There's an exclusion section, Cedric said quietly. With reasons. When a father dies, he leaves things behind, possessions, debts, memories. When a son dies, he sometimes leaves things forward, plans for children who will need someone, legal documents designating guardians, proof that he trusted you even when he thought you didn't trust him back. It read it, I said. All of it. Cedric pulled the document closer. Eleanor Pendleton is excluded from guardianship consideration, he read. Reason she imposed financial and emotional control on me for many years and lied to me about my father's character to create and maintain our estrangement. I sat very still. Conrad knew. He'd known Eleanor lied about me, known it and written it down in legal language with witnesses present. Cedric continued reading. Brent Pendleton and Victoria Pendleton are excluded from guardianship consideration. Reason: no contact during my terminal illness, no established relationship with my child. Then Cedric read the designation section. Reason for designating Arthur Pendleton as guardian. My father was the only one who never put honor before humanity. The office went quiet. Honor before humanity. That phrase meant something specific about how Eleanor had raised our children, about the values she'd insisted mattered more than feelings or forgiveness or family bonds that couldn't be displayed in church on Sunday. Conrad had seen it, named it, rejected it, chosen me instead. I want that sentence read aloud in court, I said. The judge needs to hear it in Conrad's words. This is binding Arthur. Cedric tapped the notary seal. Dated, witnessed, legally executed. A judge will give significant weight to a parent's documented wishes. This changes everything. He reached into a folder and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, sealed. The kind of envelope you use for important letters, not bills or junk mail. There's also this, he said, handing it to me. It was sealed inside the mailbox with the will. I looked at the front. One word, written in Conrad's handwriting, shakier than the watch badge inscription, terminal illness, making the letters slope and waver. But the word itself was clear, a nickname, the one Conrad had used when he was small, climbing onto the tall stool in my shop to watch me repair watches. The name he'd called me from age 4 until he left at 31. Nobody else had ever used that name. Not Eleanor, not Brent, not friends or customers or anyone. Just Conrad. And I hadn't heard it spoken in 6 years. If you've ever held a letter from someone who's gone and known that, opening the envelope means hearing their voice one final time. You understand why I couldn't do it in that law office with the attorney watching and the afternoon sun coming through the window. Like this was just another piece of business. I'll read this later, I said, standing. Alone. I'm not ready for his last words yet. Cedric nodded. Didn't ask to see it, didn't press for information, just handed me a folder with copies of the will and guardianship designation. We'll file this with the court tomorrow, he said. Eleanor's petition supporting Brent and Victoria will be much weaker against Conrad's explicit designation of you. I carried Conrad's letter out of the office in my vest pocket, the same pocket where I'd kept the watch badge Atlas had returned to me weeks earlier. The envelope was warm from my hand, and the handwriting on front was the careful block letters of a 10-year-old boy learning to write addresses for the first time. Except, this was written by a 31-year-old man dying alone, making sure the nickname would reach the right person. I wasn't ready to read what was inside. I needed to sit with the fact that Conrad had planned this, trusted this, believed in this reunion even while Eleanor was telling him I'd rejected him. He'd rented a mailbox when Atlas was born, renewed it every year, updated it 3 weeks before dying, put my childhood nickname on an envelope, and sealed his final words inside. Conrad had spent 5 years building a bridge back to me, one legal document and one stuffed animal and one sealed letter at a time. I wouldn't open that letter for 3 days. And when I finally did, I would understand that Eleanor's lies went deeper and farther back than I'd ever imagined. Eleanor called a family meeting for Saturday afternoon, late July, to resolve this situation internally. And when I walked in, carrying the truth folder with Preston Frost from County Child Services beside me, her face went the particular shade of white that means someone's careful plan just collapsed. Conrad's letter remained unopened in my vest pocket. 3 days since Cedric handed it to me. I wasn't ready yet to hear my son's final words. Eleanor's living room hadn't changed in 40 years. Cream carpet, family photos on the mantle, neutral territory she'd controlled through staging and unspoken rules. Brent and Victoria sat on the sofa. Victoria with a leather portfolio, Brent with hands-folded eyes on the carpet. Eleanor stood near the fireplace, positioned like a moderator. Then I stepped through the doorway with Preston Frost behind me. Preston Frost, a 45-year-old welfare investigator with Franklin County Child Services, carried a clipboard and maintained the neutral professional expression of someone who'd witnessed enough family dysfunction to recognize it immediately without showing judgment. Eleanor's composure fractured briefly before she reconstructed the facade. "Arthur," she said, voice controlled but tight, "I wasn't expecting you to bring outside parties to a family discussion." "Preston Frost, Franklin County Child Services," I said. "I invited him because this concerns a child in state custody." Preston nodded. "Mrs. Pendleton, I'm here to observe and document. Please proceed." Eleanor had expected private persuasion. She got official oversight with an impartial witness taking notes. I sat across from Brent and Victoria. Preston remained standing near the door. Eleanor smoothed her skirt, began her prepared presentation. "We're here because we all want what's best for Atlas," she started, reasonable tone, concerned grandmother. "Arthur, you've never raised a child alone. You live a solitary life, work constantly. A 5-year-old needs consistency, stability, 2 parents." She gestured to Brent and Victoria. Brent and Victoria have established their home research school districts, prepared a bedroom. They can provide structure. Victoria opened her portfolio. "We have pediatrician appointments, scheduled enrollment paperwork. I raised Conrad for 31 years, I said quietly. From the day he was born until Eleanor told him I'd rejected him. The room went silent. Preston's pen scratched notes. Eleanor tried to recover. "That's not the situation, was more complicated." Preston looked up from his notes. "Mrs. Pendleton," he said, voice measured, "I need clarity on timeline. You were notified as next of kin 7 weeks ago. Why did no family member contact the child during that period?" Eleanor's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I was coordinating internally," she said, "determining the best placement using store. The child was 3 miles from this house in foster care for 7 weeks, Preston said. Not accusatory, persistent. "I'm asking why no one visited him, called him, or informed his grandfather of his existence." Some questions answer themselves through the silence they create, not because people don't know the answer, but because saying the answer out loud would require admitting something they've been pretending isn't true. Eleanor looked at Brent. Brent looked at the floor. Victoria looked at the wall. 43 seconds by the mantel clock. Nobody spoke, because any answer would require explaining why a 5-year-old who'd lost both parents spent 7 weeks in a stranger's house while his family lived 3 miles away, making plans without ever once asking him how he was. Preston made another note. The scratch of his pen was the only sound. "I see," he said. Eleanor tried one more pivot. "The important thing now is moving forward. I have documentation." I said, opening the truth folder. "Would you like to see it, Mr. Frost?" Preston stepped forward. I handed him copies: DNA confirmation, welfare acknowledgement with Eleanor's signature, bank statements showing redirected benefits. Private investigator invoice. He read in silence, page after page. Finally, he looked up. "Mrs. Pendleton, I'll be including these in my report to the court," he said. "The judge will have questions." Eleanor stood. "I think this meeting is over." "I agree," I said. 2 days later, Monday morning, I sat in Cedric's office while he spread the newest document across his desk. Unredacted SSA 11. He said, "Social Security Administration responded to our subpoena. Form SSA 11, Application for Survivor Benefits. Applicant Victoria Pendleton. Co-signer Brent Pendleton. Filing date 4 weeks after Conrad's death. Benefit amount, monthly survivor, benefit $1,600. Purpose temporary care expenses for minor child Atlas Pendleton." "Atlas was in state custody," I said. "The state paid all his expenses." "Exactly." Cedric tapped the form. "They claimed expenses that didn't exist to redirect money they had no legal right to access. That's benefits fraud, Arthur. Federal offense. Fraud always leaves a paper trail because fraudsters need documentation to justify the money. The same forms they file to make theft look legitimate become the evidence that proves it was theft all along. They filed this while Atlas was sleeping in foster care," I said. "Claimed temporary care expenses for a child they had never met, and received 2 months of payments before you discovered Atlas existed," Cedric added. "The timeline is damning." I thought about Victoria's color-coded binder, the prepared bedroom, the research school districts. All props to justify claiming a child who came with $1,600 a month until age 18 and a paid-off house in Marion. I opened the Truth folder and added the SSA 11, Exhibit D, DNA confirmation showing 99.9% relationship. Eleanor's 7-week documented silence. Private investigator invoice proving 5 months foreknowledge. Conrad's notarized will, excluding everyone but me. Federal benefits fraud, with Victoria's signature requesting money for care she never provided. 6 exhibits, 52 pages, every number verified, every date cross-referenced, every gear that didn't mesh naturally identified and documented. The watchmaker had built the case the same way he'd repair a broken clock methodically, precisely without missing a single mechanism. "What's next?" I asked. "We wait for the hearing date," Cedric said, "and we prepare to present this in court. In 3 days, Victoria would call me, directly trying one last negotiation, and I would use the word no for the first time in this entire process." Victoria called my shop at 7:45 on a Tuesday evening in early August, trying to negotiate around the attorneys, and I let her talk for exactly 3 minutes before asking the question that changed her voice from reasonable to desperate. "What do you actually want, Victoria?" 3 days since I'd labeled the SSA 11 fraud documentation as Exhibit D. 3 days of waiting for the court to schedule a hearing, while evidence sat ready in the Truth folder. The phone rang while I was closing for the evening. Victoria's number on the screen. I picked up, said nothing, let her make the first move. "Arthur," she said, voice carrying practiced calm. "I was hoping we could talk frankly, just you and me without attorneys turning this into a battle." Without attorneys meant without documentation, without witnesses, without anything she'd said being used as evidence. "I'm listening," I said. "You're 63, she continued, professional tone, reasonable concern. "Atlas is 5. He needs guardians with energy who can keep up with a young child's demands. Brent and I are younger, more suited to raising an active kindergartner." I stayed silent. She took my silence as invitation to continue. "We have resources, stability, a prepared home. We've done the research, created plans. This doesn't have to be adversarial, Arthur. We all want what's best for Atlas." 3 minutes of practiced pitch. 3 minutes of watching someone present a case they had rehearsed in a mirror, testing arguments on a grandfather they assumed would be reasonable. I had been patient for 9 weeks. I could be patient for 3 more minutes. "What do you actually want, Victoria?" I asked. A pause, brief recalibration. "I just told you, a stable home for Atlas with guardians who—" "Not what you're offering," I said. "What you want. Why did you call me directly instead of going through Cedric?" Another pause, longer this time. "Because attorneys complicate things," she said. "They create conflict where there doesn't need to be any. We're family, Arthur. We should be able to resolve this internally." Internally, the same word Eleanor had used calling the family meeting. Keep talking," I said. She continued. "Resources, stability, school district rankings. The guest room, they'd prepared furniture already assembled, pediatrician appointment scheduled. Then she said it. And of course the Marion property will need proper management, someone to coordinate. Findis das dostik von. She stopped mid-sentence, caught herself. What I mean is Atlas's long-term financial security requires adult oversight. His inheritance needs to be managed responsibly until he's old enough to, face. What about Atlas? I cut in. Not his property, not his inheritance. What does he need emotionally? People reveal their priorities through sequence the same way gears reveal their function through which one moves. First, Victoria mentioned the Marion house before she mentioned Atlas's name, and no amount of backtracking could unsay that order. A stable two-parent home, obviously, Victoria said, recovering her script. Which is exactly what we're offering. Consistency structure, family dinners, bedtime routines. Everything a traumatized child needs to heal. She'd mentioned a house worth $220,000 before she'd mentioned a 5-year-old boy's emotional needs. Just like she had at my kitchen table weeks ago with the color-coded binder. Priorities don't change. They just get better disguised. Victoria, I said, I have Conrad's will. The complete notarized will with exclusion reasons for you and Brent. Silence on the line. 3 seconds, 5 seconds. What reasons? Her voice had changed. Tighter. The practiced calm cracking. I haven't read them yet, I said. I looked at the sealed cream envelope on my desk, where it had sat untouched for 3 weeks. Conrad's shaky handwriting spelling out the childhood nickname nobody else had ever used. But I will, I continued, tonight. There's a difference between not being ready to read a dead person's final words and using not being ready. As permission to avoid grief indefinitely, I'd been doing the second thing disguised as the first for 3 weeks. But telling Victoria I'd read the exclusion reasons tonight meant I couldn't avoid them anymore. The tactical leverage I was deploying against my daughter-in-law was also a commitment I was making to my dead son. Arthur, you're being completely unreasonable about this. The line went dead. She'd hung up mid-sentence the way Eleanor had. The way people hang up when they realize negotiation has failed and anger is the only response left that doesn't require admitting defeat. I set the phone down carefully. The shop was quiet except for the clocks. 20 wall clocks ticking in 20 slightly different rhythms, the symphony of mechanisms I'd assembled and maintained for 40 years. Conrad's letter sat on my desk under the brass lamp, right where I'd placed it the day Cedric gave it to me. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of walking past it every day, looking at it, touching the envelope's edge, telling myself I wasn't ready yet to hear what my son needed to say before he ran out of time to say it. But I'd just told Victoria I would read it tonight, which meant the excuse I'd been using not being ready had just expired. I reached for the envelope. My hand trembled slightly. The watchmaker's hands that could install hairsprings and balance wheels and regulate mechanisms down to seconds per day accuracy were shaking touching a piece of paper my son had touched while dying. The envelope was warm from sitting under the desk lamp for 3 weeks. Cream-colored paper, good quality, the kind you use for important letters. On the front in Conrad's handwriting, shakier than the watch badge inscription, terminal illness, making the letters slope and waver, was the nickname he'd called me from age 4 until he left at 31. A name I hadn't heard spoken in 6 years. All right, Conrad, I said to the empty shop. I'm ready to hear what you needed to say. But my hand stayed on the envelope. Didn't open it, not yet. Because once I broke that seal and read those words, they would be the last words. The final communication. The end of a conversation that had been interrupted 22 years ago and would never be continued. 3 weeks I'd been carrying this envelope between the shop and home, keeping it close, keeping it sealed, keeping the possibility alive that Conrad's voice was still waiting to be heard. Opening it meant accepting that the voice would only speak once more and then silence. I'm sorry I made you wait, I said. I slipped my thumb under the heavy paper flap and tore the envelope open. The paper gave way with a sharp rip that sounded incredibly loud in the dark, empty shop. My hands shook as I unfolded the 3 handwritten pages, my eyes instantly locking onto my son's shaky terminal stage handwriting. Dad, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but Atlas deserves to know I tried. Not addressed to me, addressed to Atlas. A letter for my grandson to find after Conrad was gone, proof that his father had tried to reach the grandfather who didn't know he existed. When Atlas was born, I called the shop. Mom answered. My hands stopped moving. Eleanor had answered when Conrad called. She said you knew about the baby and you were ashamed of me. She said you told her that a man who'd throw away his education for a pregnant girlfriend wasn't worth claiming as a son. I'd never said those words, never thought them, never even known Conrad had a girlfriend. Eleanor had invented them, put them in my mouth, delivered them to my son like I'd actually spoken them. I believed her. Conrad's writing continued. God help me, I believed her. I thought you'd rejected me, rejected Atlas, rejected everything I'd become. The paper trembled in my hands. Conrad had called when his son was born, and Eleanor had answered and told him I was ashamed that I'd rejected him, that he wasn't worth claiming. My vision blurred reading the next section. I blinked, realized the shaky letters weren't just from Conrad's illness. The ink had run in places, small spots where the paper had absorbed water. Water stains. Conrad had been crying while he wrote this. I tried calling again 3 years later. Same number. Mom answered again. Said you'd moved on, that you'd closed that chapter, that it was best if I didn't keep trying. He'd tried again, and Eleanor had lied again. Told him I'd moved on, closed the chapter, that it was best if Conrad stopped trying. I stopped calling after that. The letter continued. But I kept your business card in my wallet, the one you gave me when I was 10, the day you taught me to repair my first watch. I looked at it every time I paid for something. 22 years, Dad. I carried it for 22 years. 22 years. My son had carried my business card for 22 years while believing I'd rejected him. Every time he'd opened his wallet, every time he'd paid for groceries or gas or Atlas's clothes, he'd seen my name and thought I didn't want him. I drove through Columbus once in 2015, saw you through the shop window working at your bench. I sat in my car across the street for 20 minutes watching you. Couldn't bring myself to cross the street. What if Mom was right? What if you really didn't want to see me? 2019, 7 years ago, Conrad had been sitting across the street, watching me work, 50 feet away. And I'd never known. I tried to set the letter down. My fingers wouldn't release it. They'd cramped around the pages, knuckles' white muscles locked. I had to consciously force each finger to straighten one at a time, like prying open a stuck watch case. The final paragraph waited. I never stopped thinking about you, Dad. I just thought you'd stop thinking about me. If that was wrong, if she lied, tell Atlas his dad loved his grandpa. Tell him I wanted to come home. Tell him I was just too scared to knock on the door. I sat motionless. Every moment I'd spent hating Conrad for abandoning me, Conrad had spent hating himself for believing I'd rejected him first. We'd both been grieving the same loss, blaming ourselves for different reasons, separated by lies Eleanor had told and maintained for 22 years. 2 phone calls, 2 lies, enough to keep father and son apart for 2 decades. Something slipped from between the pages, a photograph small and worn. I picked it up carefully. Conrad holding an infant. The baby, maybe 2 months old, wrapped in a blue blanket. Conrad looking down at his son with the same terrified love I'd felt the first time I'd held Conrad. The photo's edges were worn soft from handling, corners bent from years in a wallet. Conrad had carried this too, the business card and this photo side by side. Reminders of the family he'd lost, the father who he thought didn't want him, the son who would never meet his grandfather. I looked at the photo again, studied it closer. Conrad standing in a small living room, Atlas in his arms. Behind them, barely visible, a wall with something hanging on it. I squinted, brought the photo closer to the lamp. A picture frame on the wall behind Conrad. Small, the image inside too blurry to make out clearly. But the frame itself, I recognized the frame. Brass corners, beveled edge. Distinctive because I'd made it myself, in the shop 30 years ago, cut and soldered the brass corners as a birthday gift. I'd given that frame to Conrad when he turned 16, with a photo inside it. A photo of Conrad at age 10, sitting on the high stool in my shop, wearing the brass watch badge, grinning at the camera. That photo had been missing from Conrad's room when he left at 31. I'd assumed he'd thrown it away. But he hadn't thrown it away. He'd taken it with him, hung it on his wall, kept it there while raising Atlas alone. Eleanor had told Conrad I was ashamed of him, that I'd rejected him, that he wasn't worth claiming as my son. And Conrad had hung a photo of himself as a child in my shop on his living room wall anyway. I haven't slept in 36 hours, but Conrad's words, "I never stopped thinking about you," loop through my mind as I climb the stairs to Cedric Harrington's office with the letter clutched in my fist. The morning sun cuts through the 3rd-floor windows of the converted brownstone, illuminating dust motes that drift like the fragments of my understanding of the past 5 years. Cedric's secretary waves me through without a word. She's seen enough desperate clients to recognize urgency. Cedric stands when I enter, his silver hair perfectly combed, despite the early hour. At 68, he's built a reputation representing families torn apart by exactly this kind of deception. Arthur? He gestures to the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. I've been reviewing Conrad's estate file since you called last night. I hand him the letter without speaking. My throat's too tight for words. He reads in silence, his jaw tightening with each paragraph. When he finishes, he sets the pages down with deliberate care. Conrad documented everything: the hospital visits, Eleanor's interference, the lies she told him about you. Can we use this? My voice cracks. Can this help me get Atlas? It's more than helpful. It's devastating evidence of Eleanor's pattern of manipulation. Cedric opens a file folder, extracting several typed pages. But there's something you need to hear first. Conrad's formal will. He had me draft it 6 weeks before he died, and he was very specific about his reasoning. Arthur's hands shake holding the will, the last document Conrad signed, before cancer stole his ability to write his own name. I, Conrad Alexander Pendleton, being of sound mind and body, do hereby designate the following distribution of my estate. To my father, Arthur Pendleton, whom I now understand, was the only person who never put honor before humanity. I leave my entire estate, including my home at 412 Franklin Street, all savings and investments, and full guardianship of my son, Atlas Conrad Pendleton. The words hit like physical blows. Conrad understood. In the end, he understood. I specifically exclude my sister-in-law, Victoria Pendleton, from any inheritance or guardianship consideration, due to fraudulent benefit claims and failure to facilitate contact with my father. I specifically exclude my mother, Eleanor Pendleton, from any guardianship role due to financial and emotional control exercised throughout my adult life, and for lies told about my father's character that prevented reconciliation for 5 years. I press my palm against my chest, trying to contain the grief and vindication warring inside me. Conrad named it. He named exactly what Eleanor had done. He saw all of it. My voice barely rises above a whisper. Everything they did, he documented. Conrad was methodical. Cedric sets the will aside. Which brings me to what I found this morning while reviewing the opposing counsel's background. But before I reveal what Cedric discovered in those legal files, if you're invested in seeing how Conrad's integrity becomes Arthur's most powerful legal advantage in this fight, comment, honor matters below, because this next discovery could end Victoria's case before we ever reach trial, and remember some details. Here are fictionalized for storytelling purposes. Then please stay with me. Cedric pulls up a document on his laptop, turning the screen toward me. Victoria's attorney is Marcus Brennan, 52 years old, partner at Brennan and Associates specializing in family law. But here's the problem. In March 2015, Conrad filed a formal complaint with the state bar alleging that Brennan engaged in contract fraud on a property Conrad was purchasing. I lean forward reading the complaint summary. Conrad's signature sits at the bottom, dated March 15, 2015. What kind of fraud? Brennan represented a contractor who falsified inspection reports on a property Conrad was purchasing. Conrad discovered the deception, reported it, and Brennan was censured, license suspended for 6 months. Cedric's smile is sharp, which means Brennan has a direct conflict of interest representing anyone in a case against Conrad's estate. He has to withdraw, and they have 11 days to find replacement counsel or request a continuance. Either option weakens their position significantly. How many times had Conrad chosen honesty when silence would have been easier? I stare at Conrad's signature on the complaint form, remembering all the times Eleanor called him stubborn, inflexible, impossible to work with. She meant he wouldn't lie for convenience. He wouldn't bend ethics for expedience. My son reported a lawyer for fraud, I say slowly, and now that same lawyer can't fight against his wishes for his own child. Conrad's integrity created legal advantages he probably never anticipated. Cedric closes the laptop. I'm filing the motion to disqualify Brennan this afternoon. Between this and Conrad's, will explicitly stating Eleanor's exclusion for lying about your character, we have documentation of a pattern that directly contradicts their narrative. I think about the letter in my pocket. Conrad writing those words while dying, making sure I knew he'd figured it out. Making sure I had the ammunition to fight for Atlas. There's one more thing. Cedric hesitates, which makes my stomach drop. In all my weeks of working with him, I've never seen him hesitate. I pulled Eleanor's phone records from Discovery. There's a text message sent. March 17th, 2015, 2 days after Conrad filed that bar complaint, to a number registered to Etskario Seiskuoa. Yeah, my phone buzzes. Unknown number. The preview shows just 4 words. Ask Eleanor about March. I stare at the text, Ask Eleanor about March, and then at Cedric, who's holding his phone with the same confusion on his face. Before either of us can speak, my phone rings. Eleanor, I silence it. Whatever March means, she can explain it tomorrow in court. The knock comes at 8 p.m. sharp, 3 measured raps that I recognize from 40 years of marriage. For the first time in 40 years, I watch her cry. Feel the weight of 40 years settle on my shoulders. She looks smaller than I remember, older. The porch light catches the silver in her hair, and for a moment I see the woman I married, instead of the one who stole 5 years from me and Conrad. I need to tell you something, she says. Before tomorrow. I don't invite her in. I step onto the porch and close the door behind me. You have 5 minutes. I was pregnant at 19. The words come fast like she's been rehearsing. Before you. Before I met you. My family made me stand in church and apologize every Sunday for 3 years. 3 years of standing in front of the congregation while they prayed for my soul. I wait. There's more. There's always more with Eleanor. The boys' family paid for everything, made it go away. But my parents, they said I'd shame them, that I'd ruined any chance at a decent life. Her hands twist together. And then I met you. You were kind. You were steady. You didn't ask about my past. So when Conrad got Victoria pregnant, when Conrad did the same thing I couldn't, she stopped swallows. I couldn't let it happen again. I couldn't watch my son make the same mistake that destroyed 3 years of my life. The anger rises in my chest, but it's different now. It's tired. So you made sure he'd suffer like you did. You defended honor. You sacrificed our son. I defended our family. Her voice shakes. I tried to protect him from the shame, from the judgment, from... No, I cut her off. You defended the version of family in your head, the one where appearances matter more than people. Conrad tried to do the right thing. He wanted to marry her, raise his child, and you convinced him he'd ruin everyone's life if he did. He was 23. He was a father. My voice cracks. And you taught him to be ashamed of it. You taught him his son was a mistake instead of a blessing. Eleanor's face crumples. For the first time in 42 years, I watch her cry without feeling the need to fix it. I thought I was saving him, she whispers. My anger drains away, replaced by something worse, pity for the 19-year-old girl who learned shame so well she taught it to her son. You were hurt, I say quietly. I understand that now, but you hurt Conrad worse. And tomorrow I'm going to make sure you don't hurt Atlas. She leaves without another word. I watch her taillights disappear down Maple Street and feel the weight of 42 years settle on my shoulders like snow. The next morning I sit in the watch shop among the ticking clocks wearing the suit from Conrad's birth. Charcoal gray bought on credit from Penny's in 1985 still fits across the shoulders. The fabric smells like cedar from the closet where it's hung for 40 years, worn only for weddings and funerals. I wore this suit the day Conrad was born. I'm wearing it the day I fight for his son. Conrad's letter sits on the workbench beside the photo of him holding Atlas. I've read it so many times the creases are starting to tear. I never stopped thinking about you. The words loop through my mind like a prayer. 40 years. The suit still fits. The marriage didn't. I fold the letter carefully and tuck it into my vest pocket right over my heart. The welfare office is quiet when I arrive at 8:30. Carmela meets me at the door, her expression soft. He has been ready since 7, she tells me. He would not eat breakfast. He said he needed to see you before court. Atlas is sitting in the waiting area, wearing the blue button-down I bought him last week. His hair is combed, his shoes are tied, and when he sees me, his whole face lights up. You look great, Grandpa, like a real lawyer or something. I kneel down so we're eye level. I'm scared, Atlas. I need you to know that. His small hand reaches into his pocket and pulls out something brass and gleaming, the watch badge, the one I gave Conrad when he turned 12. The one with the small crack in the corner from where Conrad dropped it at his high school graduation. My dad said this will help. Atlas's fingers are careful as he pins it to my vest right below the pocket holding Conrad's letter. He wore it every day. Now you wear it. The watch badge feels like a talisman, like armor, like the physical weight of 3 generations pressed into an ounce of brass. I press my hand over Conrad's letter, over my heart that's beating too fast. Thank you. Win okay. Atlas's voice is small. I want to come home. I will. I pull him into a hug, memorizing the weight of him, the smell of the soap. Jennifer uses the trust in his small arms around my neck. I promise. The courthouse is 3 blocks away. I walk slowly, hand touching the watch badge every few steps. The brass is warm from Atlas's pocket, from Conrad's years of wearing it from my own hand 40 years ago, when I pinned it to my 12-year-old son's shirt and told him it meant he was growing up. She was hurt, I understand that now, but she hurt Conrad worse, and I won't let her hurt Atlas. The courthouse steps rise ahead of me, granite worn smooth by decades of people walking toward judgment. I take the first step, then the second. Through the glass doors I see them. Eleanor flanked by Brent and Victoria, all 3 in dark suits like they're attending a funeral. But standing beside Eleanor is a woman I don't recognize, mid-40s red suit, sharp as a knife, carrying a briefcase thick enough to be full of surprises. Eleanor found replacement counsel overnight. The woman in red is already smiling. The woman in red is already inside when I push through the glass doors. She's younger than Cedric, mid-40s maybe, with the kind of sharp smile that comes from winning cases other lawyers lose. The bailiff's voice cuts through the courtroom like a blade. All rise for the Honorable Judge Carolyn Sinclair. I stand with my hand pressed against the watch badge pinned over my heart. Judge Sinclair enters from the side door, mid-50s silver hair, pulled back tight, black robe moving like water. She's been on the Franklin County bench for 12 years, and Cedric told me she has a reputation for cutting through pretense faster than most lawyers can build it. She settles into her chair and surveys the courtroom with eyes that miss nothing. We'll address the preliminary motion first. Her voice is crisp, efficient. Mr. Harrington, you've filed a conflict of interest motion regarding opposing counsel. Cedric stands and I watch him lay out the evidence with surgical precision. Marcus Brennan's name on the letterhead. The documented fraud. The 6-month suspension, that's a matter of public record. Your Honor, Cedric says quietly, Conrad Pendleton reported fraud while raising a terminally ill child alone. His integrity speaks from the grave. Judge Sinclair reads the complaint in silence. When she looks up, her expression hasn't changed, but something in the courtroom shifts. Mr. Brennan, the complaint filed by the decedent against you in 2019 was substantiated. You are ordered to withdraw effective immediately. Brennan, a man I barely noticed sitting at Eleanor's table, gathers his papers without a word. His face is red, but he knows better than to argue. Conrad did this. Conrad reported fraud when it would have been easier to stay silent, and now that choice is protecting Atlas from beyond the grave. Noted, Mr. Harrington. Judge Sinclair turns to Eleanor's side of the courtroom. Mrs. Pendleton, do you have replacement counsel or be... It was in The woman in red stands with practiced grace. Diane Mercer for the respondents, Your Honor. I was retained late yesterday evening, so that's her name, Diane Mercer. I watch Eleanor lean close to whisper something, and Mercer nods once sharp and certain. You have 20 minutes to review the file, Ms. Mercer. We'll proceed at 9:30. Judge Sinclair glances at the clock. Bailiff, brief recess. The courtroom empties into the hallway. I stay seated, hand still on the watch badge, while Cedric steps outside to make calls. Through the open door, I hear Eleanor's voice low and controlled feeding instructions to her new attorney like she's programming a weapon. He's lived alone for 40 years. He doesn't know children. I close my eyes and feel the weight of Conrad's letter in my vest pocket. When we reconvene, Mercer stands for her opening statement. She's polished smooth in the way expensive lawyers are, like every word has been rehearsed in front of a mirror until it looks spontaneous. Your Honor, this case concerns the welfare of a 5-year-old child who has already lost his father. The question before this court is simple. Who can provide Atlas Pendleton with stability, structure, and the resources necessary for a healthy childhood? She turns slightly and I know what's coming before she says it. Arthur Pendleton is a 63-year-old man living alone who has never been responsible for others beyond his failed watch repair business. Failed. The word lands like a slap. He didn't raise his son past age 31. He has no experience with modern children, no understanding of current educational standards, no network of support. He is driven by guilt, not capability. How many midnight fevers, how many scraped knees, how many school plays did Never Responsible cover? My fingers tighten on the watch badge. 31 years. I raised Conrad from the moment the nurse put him in my arms, red-faced and screaming, until the day he moved into his own apartment at 22. I taught him to tie his shoes, to ride a bike, to change a tire, to read a blueprint, to apologize when he was wrong. I sat through parent-teacher conferences and school concerts and baseball games, where he spent most of the time in the outfield picking dandelions. 31 years of packed lunches and homework checks and bedtime stories, and teaching him that being a man meant showing up even when it was hard. Never responsible for others. In contrast, Mercer continues, Eleanor Pendleton offers a stable two-parent household with established routines, educational resources, and family connections. She and her husband have the time, means, and commitment to provide Atlas with everything his grandfather cannot. I look across the courtroom at Eleanor. She's watching me with an expression I can't parse: triumph, maybe, or regret, or fear that I'll say the quiet part out loud, that she's the reason I'm alone, that she spent 5 years systematically destroying my relationship with my son, so that now she can stand in court and weaponize the isolation she created. Brent sits beside her, stiff and silent. Victoria's on his other side, eyes down, hands folded. They look like they're at a funeral instead of a trial. The watch badge against my chest feels heavier. Conrad wore this, trusted this, saved this for Atlas to give back. I think about Eleanor's confession on the porch last night, the shame she carried from 19, the 3 years of standing in church while strangers prayed for her soul. I understand her pain. I do. But understanding doesn't mean forgiving, and it sure as hell doesn't mean letting her do to Atlas what she did to Conrad. She told them I'm alone. I think watching Eleanor whisper something else to Mercer. She didn't mention she's the reason why. 40 years of marriage. She knows every weak point, every scar, every place I'm vulnerable, and she's aiming for them all. Mercer is still talking something about modern parenting standards and age-appropriate boundaries when Judge Sinclair holds up one hand. Ms. Mercer, I'm looking at the case file. The judge's voice cuts through the courtroom like glass. It says here, Mr. Pendleton raised his son as primary caregiver for 31 years while running a business. My breath catches. Mercer pauses, recalibrating. Your Honor, that was decades ago. 31 years is 31 years, counselor. Judge Sinclair's eyes move from the file to me, then to Eleanor. Before we continue, I have some questions about this characterization. Judge Sinclair's question hangs in the air, and Mercer opens her mouth to respond, but Cedric is already standing. He rises with a hardcover document in his hands and says, Your Honor, I'd like to present Conrad Pendleton's last will and testament updated 3 weeks before his death, and the courtroom goes still. The will is bound in navy leather, professional and final. Cedric carries it to the bench like he's carrying something sacred. This will was executed 3 weeks before Conrad's death, while he was under hospice care, but fully competent. Cedric's voice is steady, but I hear the weight behind it. Notarized and witnessed by 2 hospice staff members who can attest to his mental clarity at the time of signing. Judge Sinclair accepts the document, turning pages with careful attention. I watch her eyes move across Conrad's final words, and something in her expression shifts. Notarized and witnessed. The document is accepted into evidence. I'd like to read the designation and exclusion clauses in their entirety, Your Honor. Cedric glances back at me, and I see the question in his eyes. Are you ready? I touch the watch badge through my vest. I'm ready. Cedric returns to our table and opens his own copy of the will. The pages rustle in the silence, and I realize the entire courtroom is holding its breath. Eleanor sits rigid at her table. Victoria's hands are folded so tight, her knuckles have gone white. Brent stares straight ahead like he's bracing for impact. The words sound different spoken aloud in court. Official, irrevocable. Reason for designation. Cedric pauses, and I know what's coming. I've read this line 100 times since Conrad died, but hearing it spoken in front of Eleanor, in front of the judge, in front of everyone who questioned whether I deserved Atlas. My father was the only one who never put honor before humanity. Conrad, you saw it. Even at the end, you saw what mattered. The courtroom is so quiet I can hear the clock on the wall ticking. Judge Sinclair leans forward slightly, reading along with her own copy. Eleanor's jaw tightens, but she doesn't move. Exclusion clauses. Cedric continues, and now his voice has an edge. Eleanor Pendleton is excluded from any guardianship consideration or estate management role. I watch my wife's face. 40 years of marriage, and I can still read every micro-expression. The slight widening of her eyes, the way her breath catches, the color draining from her cheeks. Reason for exclusion. Cedric doesn't rush. He lets each word land. Financial and emotional control exercised throughout my adult life, plus lies told about my father's character that prevented reconciliation during my final years. Eleanor's face drains. This isn't courtroom strategy. This is her son telling the world she lied. Judge Sinclair sets down her pen. The decedent explicitly names deception as grounds for exclusion. Eleanor leans toward Mercer and whispers, "He didn't understand. He was sick. But I heard it. The judge heard it. And the court reporter is typing every word into the record." Conrad understood perfectly. He was dying, not stupid. He knew exactly who had lied and why and what it cost. Cedric turns the page. Victoria Pendleton is excluded from guardianship consideration. Reason: no contact during illness. Victoria's head drops. She's staring at the table now, at her folded hands, at anything except the front of the courtroom, where her brother's final judgment is being read into the legal record. Brent Pendleton is excluded from guardianship consideration. Reason: no contact during illness. Brent turns to the window. His profile is stone, but I see the muscle working in his jaw. 4 words. Conrad used 4 words to summarize his half-sibling's entire relationship with him during the worst year of his life. No contact during illness. They didn't call, didn't visit, didn't send cards or flowers or acknowledgement that their brother was dying 3 miles away in a hospice bed. And Conrad noticed. He counted the silence. "Harry Judge Sinclair." Cedric says quietly 4 words, clear and unambiguous. I can read counselor, but there's no rebuke in her tone. She's looking at Eleanor and her adult children like she's seeing them for the first time. The words hang in the courtroom like a verdict from beyond the grave, Conrad choosing sides in a war he didn't start. Cedric closes the will, but doesn't sit down. "I'll read that designation reason once more for the record, Your Honor. Conrad Pendleton's own words written 3 weeks before his death. My father was the only one who never put honor before humanity. Honor before humanity. That's what Eleanor taught. That's what she believed, what she defended, what she used to justify every lie and manipulation. Appearances matter. Reputation matters. What will people think matters more than what people feel. And Conrad chose me because I never learned the lesson. I chose humanity. I chose my grandson over my pride. I chose Conrad's memory over Eleanor's version of family. I chose Atlas's future over my comfort." The courtroom falls silent. Eleanor sits, rigid face carefully blank, but her hands are shaking. Victoria hasn't looked up from the table. Brent is still staring out the window, like if he looks hard enough he can see through the glass to some other version of this moment. Judge Sinclair lets the silence stretch. Then she looks directly at Diane Mercer. "Ms. Mercer, your opening statement characterized Mr. Pendleton as irresponsible and incompetent. The decedent's own words written while dying, witnessed, notarized, and legally binding contradict that assessment." Mercer stands her face tight. "Your Honor, with respect, a father's emotional attachment doesn't necessarily reflect—" "Stop!" Judge Sinclair's voice cuts like a knife. "This isn't emotional attachment. This is a dying man making a legal designation after explicitly excluding his mother for lying about his father's character. I want to know how you plan to argue that Mrs. Pendleton should raise this child when her own son condemned her deception in his final testament." Mercer opens her mouth, closes it, looks at Eleanor. Eleanor stares straight ahead, and I realize I'm watching her entire legal strategy collapse in real time. The judge is waiting, the courtroom is waiting, and for the first time since this started, Eleanor has no answer. Mercer is still standing mouth open, searching for words that won't come. Eleanor stares straight ahead like she's carved from stone. Cedric doesn't wait for an answer. He places a single sheet of paper on the document projector, Form SSA, 11 Social Security Survivor Benefits Application, and Victoria's face goes white before he says a word. "Benefits approved." Cedric continues running his finger down the form, effective May 1st, 2021. Monthly payment $1,600, deposited directly to Ms. Pendleton's personal checking account. Judge Sinclair's eyes narrow. $1,600 monthly. Why would a temporary caregiver receive survivor benefits rather than the legal guardian? That's the question, Your Honor. Cedric pulls up another document. The answer is in the cash flow analysis. The screen changes to a bank statement, Victoria's checking account from Fifth Third Bank. The transactions are highlighted in yellow, 3 months of identical patterns. May 16th, $1,600 deposited Source Social Security Administration. Cedric's voice is clinical methodical. May 18th, 48 hours later, $1,600 paid to Capital One Visa. He scrolls down. June 16th, $1,600 in. June 18th, $1,600 to Capital One. July 16th, same deposit. July 18th, same payment to Capital One. The pattern is so obvious it's obscene. Judge Sinclair sets down her pen with deliberate care. The survivor benefits went to credit card debt, not the child's care. The state paid all Atlas's expenses during this period, Your Honor. Cedric's tone doesn't change, but I hear the anger underneath. Ms. Pendleton pocketed every penny meant for her nephew. I watch Victoria shrink in her chair. She's not looking at the screen anymore. She's staring at her hands at the table, at anything except the evidence of what she did. $4,800 meant for a motherless 5-year-old redirected to Visa payments for designer handbags. Cedric projects another document, Franklin County Department of Job and Family Services Expenditure Report. State welfare records show that during May through August 2021, the county paid for Atlas's food, clothing, medical co-pays, and temporary foster care placement. Every expense the survivor benefits was intended to cover. Judge Sinclair does the math out loud. 3 months at $1,600. That's $4,800. $4,800 that should have reduced the taxpayer burden of caring for a bereaved child, Cedric says quietly. Instead, it paid Ms. Pendleton's credit card bills while Atlas ate donated food and wore clothes from the county assistance program. She took money meant for Atlas and paid her Visa bill, while he ate donated food, while he slept in a welfare office, while he asked strangers if anyone was coming for him. My hands are shaking. I press them flat against the table. The invoice appears on screen. Professional letterhead, itemized charges, payment confirmation. Service rendered. Cedric reads, locate subject. Conrad Alexander Pendleton, last known residence Marion, Ohio. The investigator's report attached to the invoice states, located subject Conrad Pendleton at Marion General Hospital Hospice Unit. Confirmed terminal pancreatic cancer diagnosis, estimated 2 weeks remaining. Minor child Atlas Conrad Pendleton, age 5, residing with the subject. No other family present. How long does it take to make a phone call? 2 months. Eleanor had 2 months. Judge Sinclair looks up from the document, and her expression has shifted from professional neutrality to something colder. Mrs. Pendleton knew her son was dying and had a 5-year-old child in January. Welfare didn't contact Mr. Pendleton until June. June 4th. Cedric confirms. 7 weeks after this report was filed, 7 weeks after Mrs. Pendleton learned her grandson existed and her son was dying. I stare at Eleanor across the courtroom. She knew. She hired an investigator, got confirmation that Conrad was in hospice with a 5-year-old son, and she didn't call me, didn't call Child Services, didn't do anything except apparently coordinate with Victoria to file for benefits the day after the funeral. The private investigator's report is dated January 15th. Conrad died March 20th. Eleanor had 2 months to call me before Conrad died. 2 months where I could have driven to Marion, could have sat beside my son's bed, could have told him I forgave him, could have met Atlas while Conrad was still alive to introduce us. 6 days. She took those 6 days from me, deliberately, systematically, while knowing exactly what was happening. Mrs. Pendleton. Judge Sinclair's voice cuts through the courtroom. Eleanor finally looks up, meeting the judge's eyes. You knew your son was dying since January. You didn't contact your husband. You didn't contact Child Services. You had 2 months of advance knowledge, and you chose to do nothing while your daughter filed fraudulent benefit claims. The courtroom is silent. Every eye is on Eleanor. Do you have anything to say? Eleanor's jaw works. Her hands are folded so tight the knuckles are bone white, but she says nothing. Seconds tick by, 10, 15, 20. The record will reflect Mrs. Pendleton declines to respond. Judge Sinclair says, finally. Diane Mercer stands abruptly chair, scraping against the floor. Your Honor, my clients invoke their Fifth Amendment rights regarding the financial arrangements. My stomach drops. They're not denying it. They're not explaining it. They're invoking the Fifth Amendment, the right against self-incrimination, because anything they say could be used against them in criminal court. Mercer knows the benefits fraud is prosecutable. And she just told the judge that Eleanor and Victoria won't answer questions because their answers would incriminate them. Judge Sinclair leans back in her chair, studying Eleanor and Victoria with an expression I can't read. Noted Ms. Mercer, your clients invoke their Fifth Amendment protection. The silence that follows feels like a verdict. The silence stretches. Mercer sits down, face tight. Eleanor stares at the table in front of her, hands still folded white-knuckle tight. Judge Sinclair's voice cuts through the silence like a gavel strike. Mrs. Pendleton, your attorney has invoked the Fifth Amendment, but I'm asking you directly. Did you know your son was dying in April? Eleanor stands without permission. I did everything to protect this family. Her voice echoes off the courtroom walls. Everything? Mrs. Pendleton, sit down immediately, or I will hold you in contempt. Eleanor ignores the order. Her voice rises 42 years of controlled fury finally detonating. At 40 years I held everything together while he fixed watches. While he chose sentiment over sense, while he put humanity before honor. Diane Mercer grabs Eleanor's arm, trying to pull her down. Mrs. Pendleton, please. Eleanor jerks away. Her face is red tears streaming, but she's not sad, she's enraged. She turns toward me and I see something in her expression I've never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, pure contempt. And that child shouldn't have existed. The courtroom freezes. My blood turns to ice. It's that child shouldn't have existed. Conrad threw away everything for a pregnant girlfriend, and you let him. You encouraged him. You said love mattered more than reputation. No, Atlas is listening. I turn toward the waiting room door. It's cracked open, and through that 6-inch gap, I see him. Atlas stands motionless, 5 years old, in his blue button-down shirt, staring at Eleanor through the opening. His stuffed rabbit, the gray one with one ear shorter than the other, the only thing he brought from Conrad's house, drops from his hands to the floor. He heard her. He heard every word. I'm moving before I decide to move. 4 steps across the courtroom, through the door. Kneeling before Atlas, who stands frozen, the rabbit at his feet, his face completely blank. Grandpa is here. I pull him into my chest, and he doesn't resist, doesn't move. Just let me hold him while his heart hammers against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape. She's wrong, I whisper into his hair. You hear me? She's wrong about everything. The stuffed rabbit on the floor, Atlas's only possession from Conrad's house, lies abandoned where it fell when the boy heard he shouldn't exist. I feel a gentle hand on my shoulder. Carmela. Come with me, Atlas. Her voice is soft, practiced. Let's go find the vending machine. I think they have those chocolate chip cookies you like. Atlas's small hand releases my collar slowly. He doesn't look at me. Don't look at Carmela. Just takes her hand and lets her lead him away down the hallway. He looks back once over his shoulder. His face is still blank, empty. I'll be right there, I call after him. 5 minutes. I watch until they disappear around the corner, then force myself to turn back to the courtroom. Eleanor is being restrained by the bailiff. She's stopped shouting, but she's shaking face, blotchy and wet. Diane Mercer stands beside her, looking like she wants to be anywhere else. Brent and Victoria sit rigid at their table, staring at nothing. Judge Sinclair's expression has gone from professional neutrality to something I can only describe as disgust. Mr. Pendleton, she says, do you have anything you'd like to say before I rule? I walk to the front of the courtroom. I'm not holding papers, not holding Conrad's letter, or the will, or any of the 52 pages of evidence Cedric compiled. Just standing there in my 40-year-old suit with the watch badge pinned over my heart. I'm a watchmaker, I say quietly. I repair broken things with patience and clean hands. That's all I've ever done. My hands, watchmaker's hands, steady for 40 years, shake as I speak, because some repairs require breaking yourself open first. I have 52 pages of evidence proving I'm the only person in this room with no financial motive, no fraud allegations, no lies documented in legal filings, just a grandfather who wants to raise his grandson the way his son wanted. I look at Eleanor. She won't meet my eyes. My son died alone because of a lie. I will not let my grandson grow up with a second lie. Judge Sinclair nods once. Thank you, Mr. Pendleton. Please sit. She takes exactly 10 seconds to review the documents in front of her. Then she looks up. I hereby grant temporary guardianship of Atlas Conrad Pendleton to Arthur Pendleton, effective immediately. The estate is frozen pending investigation. SSA 11 fraud allegations are referred to federal authorities for criminal investigation. Eleanor makes a sound half gasp, half sob. Eleanor Pendleton is prohibited from contact with the minor child for a minimum of 90 days pending psychological evaluation. Visitation will be re-evaluated at that time based on professional recommendation. Eleanor collapses into her chair. Brent and Victoria sit stone-faced, staring at the table like if they don't move, they can disappear. Cedric touches my arm. We won, but I'm already standing, already moving toward the hallway where Atlas disappeared with Jennifer. I find them by the vending machines on the second floor. Atlas is holding an unopened package of cookies, turning it over and over in his hands without eating it. When he sees me, he sets the cookies down carefully on the bench beside him. I kneel again. My knees are going to ache tomorrow, but I don't care. Atlas reaches out slowly, like he's not sure I'm real. His small hand touches my face, pressing gently against my cheek, my jaw, my forehead, checking if I'm solid, if I'm true. I cover his small hand with mine. Are you my grandpa? His voice is barely a whisper. Yes, I'm your grandpa, and I'm taking you home. She said I shouldn't exist. Jennifer's news is procedural temporary guardianship, requires home inspection within 72 hours. Not a threat, just bureaucracy. I nod sign the forms she produces and take Atlas home. The back room smells like wood varnish and old paper, and Atlas stands in the doorway holding his stuffed rabbit, looking at the narrow bed I made up with sheets that still have creases from the package. Is this mine? His voice is small, uncertain. The bed and the light and everything. I installed the nightlight yesterday, a soft yellow glow shaped like a moon, placed Conrad's childhood books on a small shelf I built from scrap wood, hung a curtain over the storage shelves so Atlas wouldn't have to sleep, looking at boxes of watch parts and old tax files. It's yours for as long as you need it. Atlas touches the nightlight, then the books, then the edge of the blanket. Each touch is careful, like he's checking if they're real or if they might disappear. Forever. The word cracks something in my chest. Forever. He climbs into bed without taking off his shoes. I helped him with the laces, pulled the blanket up to his chin, and left the door cracked open with the hallway light on, because he asked me to. The next morning, I found him in the workshop standing beside the tall chair Conrad used to sit in when he was learning watch repair. It's too high for Atlas. His feet don't touch the footrest, but he climbs up anyway, gripping the seat with both hands, settling himself in the exact center. Unless my dad sat here right when he was little. My throat tightens. Every Saturday morning from age 7 until he left for college, Atlas straightens his back, tilts his head the same way Conrad used to when he was concentrating. The resemblance is so sharp, it hurts. Will you teach me like you taught him? Third generation. Atlas is the third generation of Pendletons, who could learn this craft, sit in this chair, carry forward something Eleanor spent 5 years trying to destroy. Yes, I say. If you want to learn, I'll teach you. I place the simplest pocket watch on the table, stopped at 3:17, needs only cleaning, nothing broken. I show Atlas how to hold the magnifying glass without touching the lens, how to open the case without forcing the hinge. His small fingers struggle with the tools. They're too big for his hands, made for adult grip and adult precision, but he tries tongue press between his teeth in concentration. Patience, I tell him, never force what's broken, understand it first. I cover his hand with mine, guide the movement. The case opens. The mechanism inside is dusty, but intact. Together we clean the gears with a soft brush, remove the buildup that's been stopping time. The watch starts ticking under Atlas's fingers, and I hear Conrad's laugh in the sound, impossible, but real. I fixed it. Atlas's whole face lights up. Grandpa, I fixed it. We fixed it, together. 1 month later, I visit Cedric's office for the legal update. He's wearing his reading glasses, papers spread across his desk in organized chaos. Federal investigation is formal, he says, without preamble. Victoria must repay $4,800 immediately, 3 months of fraudulently collected benefits, and faces 12 months probation. The payments were finally stopped when I obtained legal guardianship. And Eleanor, Cedric's expression doesn't change. Still under review. No charges filed yet, but the investigation continues. The private investigator invoice complicates things, proves knowledge and intent, but doesn't directly prove fraud. They're building the case carefully. Justice is a watch mechanism, each consequence a gear turning another, setting the whole thing in motion toward equilibrium. There's something else. Cedric pulls a different file. Brent filed for separation 3 weeks after the trial. He wasn't at the federal investigation meeting with Victoria. I absorbed this slowly. Brent. The son Eleanor molded most carefully, the one who learned to value reputation over relationship, the one who stood beside Victoria in court supporting Eleanor's lies. She destroyed her own marriage defending Eleanor's lies, I say quietly. Cedric nods. Looks that way. Victoria's facing the fraud charges alone. Brent moved out of their house in Clintonville. No forwarding address on file. I think about Brent at 7, 8, 9 years old, Eleanor's firstborn, the one she had the most time to shape before Conrad came along, the one who learned earliest that love was conditional on performance, that family meant maintaining appearances, that honor mattered more than humanity. Brent was Eleanor's first victim, just like Conrad, just like me. I wonder if he'll ever call. If he'll ever want to meet his nephew, know his father rebuild something from the wreckage. But I don't know how to reach out to a son I barely spoke to for 40 years. I return to the shop as evening settles over Maple Street. The workshop is dim lit only by the lamp over my main workbench. And there at the table, Atlas is asleep. His head rests on his folded arms, surrounded by watch parts he's been organizing. Springs in one pile, gears in another, tiny screws lined up by size. He's been working while I was gone, practicing the patience I've been teaching him. I carry him to the back room, careful not to wake him. He weighs almost nothing. 5 years old and light as a bird, all sharp angles and fragile hope. 3 weeks ago, he woke up screaming every night, calling for Conrad, asking why the lady said he shouldn't exist. Now, it's 4 nights a week, then 3. Last week, only 2. Progress. I tuck the blanket around him, smooth the hair back from his forehead. He doesn't wake. We have time, I whisper. That's what we have now. Time. Some broken things only time can fix. I'm a watchmaker. I should have always known that. As I turn to leave, I notice an envelope on the workshop table that I didn't see before. Return address, Marion, Ohio. Conrad's address. My hands shake as I open it. Inside is a small brass key attached to a tag reading Storage Unit 47 and a note in Conrad's handwriting. If anything happens to me, this is for Atlas. Don't open until he asks about his mother. I stare at the key at Conrad's careful script, at instructions from beyond the grave about a subject Atlas hasn't mentioned once in the month he's lived with me. His mother. Victoria left when he was 2 days old. He doesn't remember her, hasn't asked. But Conrad thought he would. Conrad left something evidence explanation truth locked in a storage unit in Marion, waiting for questions I don't know how to answer. I locked the storage unit key in my desk drawer. Conrad's instructions were clear. I'm good at waiting. Atlas stops 3 feet from the elementary school gate backpack, enormous on his small shoulders, and asks the question that's been building all morning. Should I tell them my father is dead or just gone away? 6 weeks ago, he couldn't say the word dead without his voice breaking. Now he's asking how to explain it to strangers. I kneel on the sidewalk eye level with him. Tell the truth. Your father died. But he loved you enough to prepare a grandfather before he left. Atlas chews his bottom lip the way Conrad used to when he was thinking. So, my father must have been very smart. The smartest person I ever knew. He adjusts his backpack strap, squares his small shoulders, and walks through the gate without looking back. At 2:55, exactly I'm there. He comes out first ahead of the whole class and nods once when he sees me satisfied, like I've passed a test he didn't tell me I was taking. In October, Cedric delivers Eleanor's letter in person, her handwriting on the envelope, my name in careful script. I sit with it at my workbench for an hour before opening it. 3 sentences, no apology, no acknowledgement of what she did to Conrad, to Atlas, to 6 years of my son's life. Just, I want to see my grandson. I have completed 4 counseling sessions. I have rights as his grandmother. Rights. I call Cedric and dictate my response. Monthly supervised visits conditional on completing 6 mandatory counseling sessions. All visits are monitored by a court-appointed supervisor. When Atlas is old enough to understand, the choice is his. I file the letter in the drawer beside the storage key. 2 things locked away. Both waiting. You can be his grandmother, I say to the empty workshop when you learn what that means. His teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, pulls me aside on the 3rd week of school. He asks permission for everything, before he picks up a pencil, before he answers a question. She pauses. We're working on it. I watch Atlas through the classroom window. He's drawing while the other children build towers and play pretend. His head is bent low over the paper, completely absorbed. He's had a difficult year, I tell her. He told the class his father died, she says quietly, but was smart enough to prepare a grandfather first. I don't answer. I just watch him draw. On a Saturday in late October, I'm at the workbench when Atlas goes still beside me. "Grandpa, there's a man outside." Brent stands on the pavement beyond the glass, hands in his pockets, older in the face than I remember. Alone. He's been standing there 10 minutes. I noticed him when he arrived. I said nothing. I waited to see what he would do. Atlas studies him the way he studies mechanisms, careful, unhurried looking for the part that explains how the whole thing works. Is he safe? He's family, the kind that made mistakes and might be trying to fix them. Atlas considers this, then nods once toward the window, a child granting permission. Brent opens the door slowly. His eyes go to Atlas first, then to me, then back to the chair where his brother once sat. "Conrad used to sit there," he says. His voice sounds like a door that hasn't been opened in years. I know. Atlas doesn't look up from the gear he's sorting. Grandpa told me, every Saturday from age 7. Brent's face does something complicated. I've seen that expression before, on Conrad in a photograph, holding a newborn. He was terrified to love, in front of people who might judge him for it. "I'm sorry," Brent says to me, 2 words carrying 40 years of weight. "Sit down," I say. "I'll make coffee." We sit 3 mugs, 3 Pendleton men, a workshop that smells like oil and metal, and the patient work of 4 decades. Brent asks Atlas about school. Atlas answers carefully, checking with me first, then relaxing one question at a time. Before he leaves, Brent pauses at the door. "She had 3 weeks before Conrad died," he says. His voice is flat factual, like he's been rehearsing the words alone in a car somewhere. "Time to call you. Time to let you say goodbye. She chose not to." He leaves without waiting for my answer. I stand in the doorway and watch him disappear down Maple Street, and I think Eleanor shaped every person in this family, and one by one, we're finding our way back to each other without her. Atlas appears at my elbow, small and certain. "Is he coming back?" "I think so." "Good." He returns to his stool, picks up the gear he set down. He needs more practice being family. 3 weeks? Eleanor had 3 weeks to call me before Conrad died. She didn't. I can't change that, but I can change what comes next. The evening before Thanksgiving, Atlas draws flowers in every window of his sketch of the shop. Houses look better when someone lives in them," he says, tongue pressed between his teeth. "My dad told me." I set down my tools and say nothing. Conrad described this place to his son from a hospice bed. He prepared Atlas to recognize home before they ever met. Thanksgiving morning comes with frost on the glass. I make scrambled eggs and orange juice. Atlas eats slowly, feet dangling from the tall chair. "Is Thanksgiving supposed to be just 2 people?" "It's supposed to be people who are grateful to be together," I tell him. "That's us." He chooses toast. Then it's right. After breakfast, he reaches into his jacket pocket and unpins the watch badge from the lining, the same place Conrad wore it for 6 years. He holds it out with both hands. "I found you. I don't need it for bravery anymore." I take it. The brass is warm from sitting close to his heart all these months. The badge's journey, Arthur to Conrad, to Atlas to Arthur. 4 hands, 40 years. 1 circle finally closed. "It brought me home," Atlas says. "That's what my dad wanted." I kneel down. "We're home now, both of us." He climbs back onto the chair. "Can you teach me more?" "The tiny gears. Every Saturday, for as long as you want." "Forever." "Forever." His small hands work slowly on the pocket watch between us. Conrad's patience. My care. The clocks tick in their separate rhythms, 17 mechanisms agreeing on the same truth. Evening settles. Atlas sleeps in the back room. No nightmares, the gray rabbit keeping watch on his pillow. I sit alone with the ticking and understand this is what winning looks like. Not the verdict, not Eleanor's collapse, not Victoria's conviction. This quiet, ordinary home. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Sometimes the people closest to you are capable of the deepest betrayal. I spent 42 years trusting Eleanor completely. I believed family meant unconditional love and protection. I was wrong. Don't make my mistake of ignoring the signs. When someone shows you who they really are, when they put reputation over people, honor over humanity, believe them. I lost 5 years with my son because I didn't see what my wife was doing until it was too late. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any other wound because it comes from where you should be safest. But here's what I learned. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and sometimes the family you build matters more than the family you're born into. Atlas needed someone who would choose him over appearances, love over control. I believe God gave me a second chance, not just to know my grandson, but to break the cycle Eleanor created. When you stand for what's right, even when it costs you everything, you're building something that can't be destroyed by lies. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever experienced family betrayal? How did you find the strength to move forward? And if you're new here, subscribe to Revenge Dad for more stories about choosing what's right when everything's at stake. Your support means more than you know. Thank you for staying until the very end. I appreciate you being part of this journey with me. One final note, while this story contains fictionalized details for storytelling purposes, the lessons about family betrayal, truth, and choosing love over control are real and worth remembering.